After snubbing business technology professionals for decades, Apple has finally re-emerged with a corporate strategy designed around the iPhone and the iPad. But is it enough? For Tech Republic and ZDNet, I'm Dan Patterson with Jason Heiner. Jason, iPhone, iPad, very powerful devices, almost as powerful as the laptop or the desktop, but will this get Apple back in the game?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we know that 99% of enterprises have iOS devices in use, according to the latest JAMF survey. 91% have Macs in use. 44% now offer Macs or PCs to the bulk of their employees, or at least some of their employees. So we know that Apple's made progress in the enterprise. They also offer some, enterprise programs that make it easier. You can thank Tim Cook for that in many ways, right? Coming from IBM, he has that enterprise background and has made the company just much more friendly. It's a lot of money for them, so it makes sense. But if you take their focus, and if you look at their focus, it is on iOS devices. So the iPhone and the iPad, they are powerful enough. They have nearly enough power to run a desktop. In many cases, if you look at for example, the benchmarks of the iPhone 8 and the iPhone 10, they are coming in stronger than even some Macs and other desktop PCs as well. So there's enough power there, and clearly their focus is there. So you have to think that it's only a matter of time before they do something like Samsung DeX, where you, this holy grail, where you dock your phone connected to a monitor, mouse, and a keyboard, and you can use that as your device. Will enterprises get into that? It's tough to see. A lot of the phones that are in use in the enterprise are BYOD, and so would they hand out phones or tablets instead of in a PC? That's an open question. But certainly, I think we have to expect it's only a matter of time before Apple, goes in that direction, with all their focus being on these mobile devices and giving them more and more capabilities. And for the enterprise, that's probably the next big move, potentially.
Well, speaking of the Mac is back, at least for business tech pros, but is the new iMac Pro all that it's made out to be?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of their strategy here. Even before they announced this, I wrote a piece early in the year, a column, where I said, here's what they need to do to win back professionals. Because a lot of professionals, especially high-end, have been fleeing the Mac, not because they were unhappy with the experience, but because Apple wasn't producing a minimum viable product that they could use to run things like Photoshop, Premiere Pro, the rest of the Adobe suite. And honestly, Apple's been trying to get too cute with the professional computers, the iMac, especially the desktop and the high end. The Mac Pro was too cute. It was very similar to sort of missteps they've made in the past, where they made a very unupgradable device that looked good, but wasn't real practical. They really have gone the same route with the iMac Pro, this very overpriced, not super upgradable device that looks great, super impressive, but not very practical if you're a professional. And so they really just need to go back to doing what they do on the desktop anyway, what they did with the old Mac Pro, just a large, nice looking aluminum tower that's highly upgradable and highly capable. Now on the laptop, the mistake that they've made there is it's been rumored for a decade, literally since the first MacBook Air came out in 2008. It was rumored that it was going to have mobile broadband in it, right? And you and I know a lot of people that like using the iPad and are considering using it as their main computer. One of the main reasons when you really talk to them about it that they want to do it is that mobile broadband, right? Being able to not have to be a slave to Wi-Fi hotspots, but be able to connect to a mobile network to get your connection when you're not on Wi-Fi or Ethernet. So if they would put that in the Mac, they could go a long way toward winning a lot of professionals to the Mac. But that's the one move they haven't made and continue to not make there. And they've doubled down more on the iPad Pro line in that sense. So those are two things that Apple really needs to do if they want to win back and win over the enterprise with the Mac.
It almost feels as though Apple's strategy functions in different silos, much
Yeah.
like a lot of different enterprise companies, but Apple has branded themselves as thinking very differently. So it's an interesting time to see Apple's business tech strategy. The last competency that Apple really does have, though, that business tech professionals need is security, particularly when it comes to things like Face ID. Will we see that in a desktop or in a Mac version, or is it destined to stay in the mobile device?
Yeah, that's a really important question. We know from that JAMF survey that a lot of enterprise providers, they find iPhone and iOS, iPad devices easier to deploy, more secure, more reliable, and so they have a high amount of faith in them. Security is increasingly important. We know with all of the issues we've had in cybersecurity, and there's a lot of old products that are not secure, and we're still sort of paying our debt on those. And so one of the big bets for making security more secure, more effective in the enterprise is biometrics. So Face ID, Apple says, is more secure. It's less likely to be faked mathematically. But right now, as you said, it's only in one device, the iPhone X. Even Touch ID, which is spread to a number of other devices, it's really only in two devices. The MacBook Pro line, and then the iPhone X or the iPhone. Actually, it is also in the iPad line. So they have spread that a little further, but it's not in the iMac, or it's not in a device like the Mac Mini. Or Apple TV, maybe, if you're running that in conference rooms, for example. So Apple still has some work to do in moving it to other parts of the business. And does that mean they come up with a separate device that you can use, that has a Touch ID in it, like its own fingerprint scanner? Or do they make a keyboard that has an integrated fingerprint scanner? Do they offer a webcam that basically can do the same thing that Touch ID, that Face ID does? That would be an interesting proposition, to add that on top of your iMac and possibly even a MacBook as well. So Apple has a big opportunity here, and we'll see if they take the step to bring it to more devices instead of just rolling it out, when they do an upgrade or a refresh of the iMac or a refresh of the iPad. You would expect they're going to put it in the iPad, but the Mac line is really the one to watch in terms of if they'll spread biometric further.
Well, it's a really interesting time for business tech pros to pay attention to what Apple is doing, maybe one of the most interesting times in recent memory. Jason, where can people go to learn more about Apple's evolving business technology strategy?
Yeah, best thing I would recommend is subscribe to Tech Republic's free Apple in the Enterprise newsletter. There you can get all the latest tips, news, best practices on running Apple devices in business, and best practices, tips, tutorials for professionals who want to use these devices to get more work done and be more productive.